There are women in history whose lives unfold quietly in the shadows of grandeur. Their names are known, yes, etched in ceremony and tradition, but the fullness of their stories, the weariness in their eyes, the strength in their silence is rarely spoken aloud. Queen Sofia of Spain is such a woman. For decades she fulfilled her role with grace and unflinching dignity, but behind palace walls her life has been a long and private trial. Now, as the years gather behind her, and her steps grow more reflective than resolute, she has expressed a final wish, one that breaks from royal protocol, yet echoes with the depth of a woman who has endured, and who wishes to find peace on her own terms at last. Sofia of Greece was not born for passivity. Raised in a world of crowns and expectations, she was taught from the cradle how to walk with her head held high, how to be poised even in sorrow, and how to keep her private anguish tucked beneath silken sleeves. When she married Juan Carlos I, Spain's future king, the world rejoiced in pomp and splendor. It was a union that, to the outside eye, seemed to fulfill every royal ideal. Yet from the very beginning, the marriage was strained not by politics, but by something far more intimate and heartbreaking betrayal. The infidelities of Juan Carlos were not whispered secrets. They were open wounds in the royal household, repeated and relentless. As the years passed, the silence between husband and wife grew colder. What once may have been hope gave way to indifference and eventually to a quiet form of disdain. Public appearances continued. Smiles were rehearsed. But behind it all, Sofia bore the weight of a loveless partnership, one marked not by shared joys, but by the repeated erosion of trust. Now, in her later years, Queen Sofia has turned inward, not with bitterness, but with clarity. She has devoted herself to charity, to her children, to causes that bring meaning far beyond protocol. But her personal wish for the end of her journey is both striking and strangely poetic. She does not wish to be interred in the royal pantheon of El Escorial, the resting place of Spain's monarchs and their spouses. She does not want her name etched in stone beside the man who, though king in title, failed her in every way a husband can fail his wife. Instead, Queen Sofia has chosen the sea. For those who have followed her life, this request is not altogether surprising. The Queen Emeritus has always harbored a deep love for the Mediterranean, the azure stretch of water that cradles the coasts of her childhood. In Greece, the Spanish shores she called home, and the Italian landscapes that once stirred her soul. In those waters she has known a rare kind of contentment. It is there she felt most free, far removed from the rigid structures of court life, from cold marble halls and dutiful smiles. The sea to her is a place of solace, and now it is to the sea that she wishes to return. Her desire is simple: to be cremated, and for her ashes to be scattered into the Mediterranean waters she so loves. It is a gesture both tender and defiant tender, because it reflects a lifelong romance with nature's quiet beauty. Defiant, because it breaks from centuries of royal burial customs. El Escorial, the grand and solemn monastery that has become the eternal home of Spain's monarchy, holds generations of Bourbon remains. Tradition dictates that Sofia, as queen, consort should join them, but tradition is not her god. Her heart is set not on stone tombs and vaulted chambers, but on salt air and sunlight dancing on the waves. King Juan Carlos, for his part, had once envisioned a different future. His assumption naturally was that Sofia would lie beside him in death, just as she had stood beside him in life. It was a notion rooted not in love, perhaps, but in formality. In his mind, the crown forged bonds unbreakable, even if affection had long since faded. Yet for Sofia, the idea of spending eternity next to the man who caused her so much sorrow is more than unsettling. It is unbearable. The thought fills her with unease, a final indignity she refuses to accept. Her son, King Felipe VI, has taken her wishes to heart. For all the complexities that royalty brings at the end of the day, This is a son, listening to his mother. He knows the pain she bore. He witnessed the coldness in the palace corridors, the silence that stretched through decades. And so when she shared with him her longing to become one with the Mediterranean, to let her remains drift freely in the embrace of the sea, he understood. More than understood, he agreed. For this, too, is a kind of justice, a quiet righting of old wrongs. In making this choice, Queen Sofia joins a growing number of people, royal or not, who wish for something more personal, more reflective of the lives they lived and the loves they held close. She is not seeking grandeur in death. She seeks peace. Her life has already been one of endurance. She does not want marble to remember her. She wants the tides to carry her, the seabirds to pass overhead, and the waves to whisper a lullaby where once she had no rest. And so perhaps someday not too far off on a sun-warmed morning, by the Spanish coast, a quiet boat will slip into the sea. There will be no fanfare, no golden trumpets or velvet-draped carriages. Only those who loved her truly, perhaps a few family members, perhaps those friends who remained constant over time, gathered with solemn grace. They will scatter her ashes, and the wind will catch them, and the Mediterranean will welcome her home. It is fitting, really, that a woman who spent so much of her life overlooked should in the end choose her own path. That she who endured so much in silence would be heard now not in shouted proclamations, but in a final act of self-determination. In choosing the sea over the sepulchre, Sofia reminds us that legacy is not measured in titles, but in truth. She teaches us that honor is not always found in tradition, but sometimes in the courage to depart from it. To those of us watching from afar, especially those of a certain age who have loved and lost, who have held our tongues for the sake of peace, Queen Sofia's story may feel achingly familiar. We recognize the quiet compromises, the emotional solitude, the resilience it takes to carry on when love disappoints. We understand the longing to reclaim even a sliver of dignity in a world that often values decorum over depth. And we understand, too, the power of a simple final wish. In the end, Queen Sofia's life will not be defined by the crown on her head, nor by the man to whom she was wed. It will be remembered by the grace she carried, the causes she championed, the gentleness in her eyes, even when her heart ached. And perhaps most memorably, by the way she chose to let go not into darkness, but into light, not into the crypt, but into the sea. For in that shimmering expanse in those Mediterranean waters, she so dearly loved Queen Sofia will find the peace that eluded her in life. And in that gesture, in that release, there is a quiet triumph, a final note of freedom. A queen's farewell not carved in marble, but carried on the waves. There's something profoundly human in Queen Sofia's wish that speaks to a universal truth many of us come to understand later in life, the desire to return not to palaces, but to peace. As the decades pass, and the noise of the world softens, we begin to measure life not by ceremonies or accolades, but by stillness, by the moments when we could simply breathe without pretending. For Sofia, the Mediterranean is more than just a sea. It is a memory of who she once was, before the crown, before the betrayals, before the years of quiet endurance. It is the lull of waves she heard as a child in Greece, the scent of salt air that wrapped around her in youth, the golden warmth of afternoons far from royal duty. In returning to that water, she is returning to herself. And perhaps that is the essence of her final act, restoring herself. After a lifetime defined by titles and expectations, she now wishes to write the last lines of her own story, not dictated by court traditions, nor by the long shadow of a man who never truly cherished her, but by the rhythm of her own heart. In that way, this farewell becomes not a rejection of royal legacy, but a quiet rewriting of it. She is not abandoning her heritage, she is enriching it with truth, with something deeply human, and universally understood, the yearning to be laid to rest where love once lived. It is difficult not to feel a sense of admiration for her choice. For all the constraints she endured as queen consort, she remained gracious, never stooping to gossip or bitterness. She did not retaliate publicly, nor did she ever seek pity. She simply carried on dignified in sorrow, steady in public service. And now in death she claims the very liberty she was too often denied in life. It is both an act of quiet rebellion and profound grace. For those of us who have lived through our own seasons of disappointment, who have made compromises, who have known the bittersweet ache of loving without being loved in return, Queen Sofia's decision feels almost like a benediction. It tells us we are allowed, yes, allowed to reclaim ourselves, to find rest not where others expect us to, but where our soul feels most at home.